Some animals are appallingly treated by people. A filmmaker can often show the world what's going on. In 1978, Jeff Foote described the plight of Florida's manatees in the inland waterways where they spend the winter.
People say that this placid and rather rotund creature is the origin of the legends about mermaids. It's a manatee, or to a scientist, a sirenian. The sirens were the mermaids of Greek mythology. They sang a magic song which attracted people. And although the manatee doesn't sing, people certainly find it irresistible. The divers come here for the same reason as the manatees. They gather in the warm water springs of Florida to escape the cold. The divers do it to prolong the diving season, but the manatees do it to stay alive. When they meet, some manatees will actually approach the divers. They really seem to enjoy human company, and most humans enjoy theirs. If only such dreamy mutual affection could last forever, but all too often the dream is shattered. The manatees spend the summer in the sea round the coast of southern Florida. But when winter comes and the sea temperature drops from 30 degrees centigrade to only 24, they gather in two particular places in central Florida, both hot springs. Blue Springs on the St. Johns River in the east and Crystal River on the west coast. Crystal River has become the biggest gathering place for manatees in Florida. It used not to be. Before people came and settled here, Crystal River was warm enough for a winter resort, of course. But few manatees came here because there was so little to eat. Manatees are vegetarians, and the water welling up out of the earth didn't contain enough nutrients to support much plant life. The people arrived in any numbers only a century or so ago. Waste from their houses got into the spring, raising the fertility of the water enough to start a permanent plant colony. The spring came to life. Not only manatees, but shoals of fish appeared. Now, of course, the water is no longer fertilized with sewage, but the plant community has become self-supporting. For the manatees on a crisp winter's morning, the warm water is blissful. Their relatives elsewhere live in the world's warm oceans, like the dugong in the Indian Ocean, and the whole family hates the cold. Their nearest land relatives, by the way, are elephants. Manatees truly love to be at ease. They seem to appreciate luxurious idleness quite as much as the humans sprawling on Florida's beaches further south. Although their skin is said to be nearly 2 inches thick, it must be well supplied with nerve endings. They love gentle contact, especially a leisurely scratch against the rocks round the spring. They enjoy contact amongst themselves, too. Human mothers who have suckled their children will appreciate the contentment of this manatee mother with her infant. Her nipples are just behind her forelimbs, in the same position as an elephant's. Another link with elephants is the sparseness of hair on a manatee's body. Contact between adult manatees is common. It's easy to see the affection in their gentle caresses. It's not necessarily sexual either. In the murky waters where they gather, touching is mutually reassuring, like the contact calls of land animals. The eelgrass that grows at Crystal River attracts and keeps the manatees there, but the warm water attracts other winter migrants. Crystal River has become a water playground, and on most days the manatees are outnumbered by people playing round them. The strange thing is that they don't seem to mind. They show every sign of enjoying the attentions of a few snorkeling humans. A manatee will roll over to present a huge expanse of belly to be tickled, for all the world like a gigantic puppy. They are pretty gigantic too. A full-grown 14-foot adult can weigh over half a ton. The manatees are remarkably patient with humans. And needless to say, the people are delighted with the manatees. It's not often that a truly wild animal pays one the compliment of visibly enjoying one's company. Even when the water starts to resemble people soup, the manatees don't lose patience. Not all their contacts with humans are so benign, though. The white dots on this placid individual's back are the scars of shotgun pellets. Snorkel divers are popular with manatees, as quiet, gentle scratchers and ticklers. But Crystal River is also a training ground for aqualung divers, and they are not so welcome at all. This is no reflection on the divers themselves, just on the noise they make. It's understandable that to an air-breathing aquatic mammal, the sound of streams of bubbles underwater is very bad news. It's frightening, the sound of disaster, and the manatees won't put up with it for very long. They soon get driven away. The little striped sheep's heads gather round manatees too. Some of the fish eat the abundant algae that grow on the manatee's back, but the others pull off bits of dead skin, and that can be quite irritating. The irritation is hardly noticeable to an outsider, though, since the manatee's most violent reaction is to roll dreamily on one side. Sensitive or not, the manatee's skin is very thick, and biologists studying their behavior have made use of the fact in their method of marking them. The little harpoon blade is attached to a radio beacon, a small transmitter that sends out a pulse which can be heard with an underwater microphone. The only problem is to attach the radio to the manatee. And with such slow-moving animals, it's not much of a problem. Biologists always seem to be fixing radios onto animals, and sometimes the justification for it seems rather slight. But in the case of the manatee, it's a matter of life and death. Once the manatees submerge, it's difficult to know where they are. If the scientists can learn where they go during the day, they will be better able to protect them. In the 19th century, they were harpooned for food, and large numbers were killed that way. Now that's illegal. And 100 years later, they're being harpooned for their own good. This harpooning is taking place at Blue Springs, a warm water area rather similar to Crystal River, but with one important difference. Blue Springs is a backwater of the St. Johns River, one of Florida's busiest waterways and a popular feeding place for manatees. The authorities have erected signs beside the river to try to make the boatmen take care. The scientists are trying to find which are the most favored feeding places in an attempt to define the areas of greatest danger. The hydrophone will work over quite a long range, and it's supposed to be directional. In the early tests, the biologists concentrated on animals they could see to find out just how accurate their apparatus really is. The results were very promising. The instruments will enable them to locate animals precisely during the manatees' daytime feeding excursions. Because these excursions take the manatees out into the river, they are occasions of great peril. The manatees never seem to realize the danger. With their insatiable curiosity, they just can't leave boats alone. A manatee's sensitive muzzle is the direct equivalent of an elephant's trunk. It uses it to grasp its food, as well as for inspecting interesting objects. When the muzzle gets clogged with bits of leaves, a manatee will happily clean its teeth, so to speak, on an engine or a boat's anchor rope. Although a boatman would be almost certain to spot a manatee hanging about this close to his propeller before he pulled his starter rope, what about the growing number of boats with electric starters operated from inboard? The driver might never see the manatee at all. But starting the engine is only the start of the manatee's problems. The upwelling of warm water at Blue Springs on the St. Johns River is part of a chain of hot springs stretching across central Florida. The water flows from a hole 180 feet deep at a temperature of 36 degrees centigrade, just about blood heat, and the manatees find it a comfortable place to spend the winter. They're protected while they're in the creek itself, and in such a restricted area, the regulations are fairly easy to enforce. But out in the open river, they're in mortal danger. The enormous barges that plow up and down Florida's busiest waterway are far too big to notice a manatee in the way. Here, as it happens, the river is fairly wide, and the manatees have a chance to get to the side to avoid the barges. There's another danger as well, as we'll see. It arises because the edges of the St. Johns River are carpeted in a plant called water hyacinth, a plant which manatees like to eat. It grows in dense mats floating on the surface. It interferes with the growth of other water plants by cutting off their supply of light. The hyacinth spread into Florida from South America, and because of its rapid and destructive growth, it soon became a pest. The hyacinth absorbs its food through roots dangling in the water. As the waterways became enriched by runoff fertilizers from farmland, the hyacinth flourished far too well and began to block the canals and rivers. At this point, the authorities began to consider encouraging manatees in their waterways to help clear the weed. A manatee must eat 1/5 of its body weight in a day, and that can mean up to 200 pounds of vegetation. When it's feeding, the close relationship between a manatee and an elephant is clearly visible. The proboscis is very similar to a shortened trunk. Even 200 pounds a day each wasn't a fast enough rate of weed clearance to keep the waterways working. And so the authorities started spraying the hyacinth mats with herbicide. So far, it's too soon to know whether the poison will affect the manatees. But there's another immediate danger to them. To get to the hyacinth, the manatees have to travel the inland waterways. Every pleasure boating center in Florida displays this poster. The point is that manatees move too slowly to get out of the way of fast-moving boats. And hanging just below the water surface, they're invisible to the driver. The joys of boating at speed on a broad, slow-flowing river are obvious, and hundreds of boats roar past Blue Springs every day. The exhilaration arises from the challenge of controlling a boat at full speed. It's all perfectly legitimate and huge fun. To the manatees, it must be like being buzzed by jet fighters. They can't dodge. By the time they know the boat's coming, it's gone. There's a speed limit for half a mile where the river passes a warm creek, but many of the passers-by ignore it. They might not hit anything after all, and they might not even notice if they do. But the victim knows all about it when a fast boat passes directly overhead. Boating accidents kill dozens of manatees every year and injure dozens more. Now that the manatee is officially recognized as an endangered species, serious attempts are being made to rescue wounded animals. This one, taken from the mouth of a canal in Miami, had been run over by a speeding propeller. It's too late now, but a simple wire cage round the propeller, such as boatmen often use over reefs in shallow water, could well have prevented these hideous wounds. Treatment with antibiotics is the first stage of the rescue attempt to prevent infection. An injection boosts the effect of the medication applied directly, but drugs are by no means the whole answer. A manatee can't survive for long on land because of its great weight and its reduced skeleton. Without water to buoy it up, its lungs will be compressed to the point where it suffocates. The next job in the rescue is to put the manatee into a safe pool while its wounds heal under supervision. It's gratifying to be able to report that this individual made a complete recovery and was released back into the ocean some months later. Others have been found dead from their wounds. Boating accidents are so common that practically every adult Florida manatee has at least one propeller scar. One scientist uses the scars as a means of identifying his study animals. He's made some fascinating discoveries during 6 years of study. Manatees can control their buoyancy by compressing their lungs with powerful muscles, so that they can sink with a chest full of air without having to swim downwards. When they want to rise, they can let their lungs expand again to increase their volume without breathing in. A calf stays with its mother for 2 years before it becomes fully independent. This means that the females can produce a new calf only every 3rd year, a very slow recruitment rate. Some of the manatees bear grotesque scars, indicating their ability to recover from severe wounds if vital organs are left untouched. For their part, the manatees at Crystal River have come to recognize the scientist. One of the youngsters has even become quite affectionate and playful. The crusty-looking rash on the young manatee's skin seems to be one of their childhood ailments, like measles or chickenpox. Most adults are free from it. Presumably, they've become immune. During the summer, manatees are usually solitary animals, except for mothers with calves. But in the winter, they seem to become quite sociable. Studies of recognizable individuals show that some are more friendly than others, towards each other and towards people. The little calf, only just over 6 feet long, proved to be among the friendliest of all. At Blue Springs and Crystal River, the manatees have a fairly pleasant existence, despite the dangers of fast boats and the harassment from divers. Elsewhere, along Florida's miles of residential canals, their life is becoming increasingly difficult. Not only are there even more boats, people use them like cars, but the concreted banks and the polluted waters support practically no food plants. The manatees can now only use the canals as a passage out to the reef flats at the edge of the sea, where some of them go to feed. The National Audubon Society makes aerial surveys of the manatee population twice a week during the winter. In the course of them, they found a series of unexpected gathering places for manatees actually in the sea near large power stations. From high up the chimney, it's possible to study the animals without disturbing them. They come to bask in the hot water discharge from the power station's cooling plant. Manatees get pneumonia and die if they stay for long in water less than 18 centigrade, that's 65 Fahrenheit. Normally, the sea is too cold for them in winter, but here it's comfortably warm. All's well as long as the power station keeps pumping out hot water. But in the winter of 1976, the coldest ever recorded in Florida, this one broke down, and scores of manatees died. Studies of their breathing rate and behavior show that the manatees are comfortable so long as they stay within a few hundred yards of the outflow pipe. It's disturbing to discover, though, that youngsters brought here by their mothers tend to come here on their own in later seasons. The power station is becoming a traditional wintering place. This is all very well until it breaks down again. When summer comes, the manatees disperse from the rivers into the Gulf of Mexico once more, away from the dangers of inland Florida. It's sad to think that now that they are no longer hunted, their most common cause of death is from thoughtless boatmen. The manatee may be no beauty, but it's gentle and amiable, even affectionate, towards mankind as well as to manatee kind. For thousands of years, since the last ice age, it's bumbled about sleepily in the waterways of Florida. And now, within a century, it's been battered to the brink of extinction. There are only about 1,000 left in Florida now. But given consideration, they could well recover their former numbers. It seems little enough to ask to ensure the survival of the inspiration for the sailor's dream of mermaids.
In the first 6 months of 1990, 27 Florida manatees were killed by powerboats.